break the law.
That was the voice of our first guest today on the show. Today on the show, it's our first guest. We usually only have one guest or no guest. But today we have two guests. Amazing guests. I'm happy to find out everything that we are going to find out and more. Hopefully they will come back when you find out who it is, who they are. They're both standing by. Can't believe that. We'll get to that in a minute. Wanted to talk about for the next 2 weeks. We're going to do a commercial here. This is a commercial. A lot of people wonder, how can you get by without commercials? Here's one. Here's a commercial for the for the show, though. So that's fair enough. The thing that it's fair enough if it's not too much of a lowering myself to take on some corporate backer, is it? If I actually support it. If I, as an artistic or an entity of any capacity, legal or otherwise. But in any case, for the next 2 weeks only, because the event we're talking about is Ottawa's Lift, the Cannabis and Hemp Expo. We're going to go there. And if you look on our socials every day, you'll find ways to try to obtain some of these tickets. Because we're going to give a pair away every day. So if you're in the Ottawa area, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, Ottawa being the capital of this, what is it? We just became 150 years old of one particular set of organizational rules as opposed to what had been here earlier. But anyway, that's where that is. It's the capital of Canada. And so check us out on all of our socials, so like at Green Crush Pod, etc. And now we'll get to the reason that the show exists is because a lot of things happened around 2013-14, and I didn't think it was going to put me in a place where I thought I would have to break the law. But when there was nothing else, what else do you think someone's gonna do? Who cares? You have to try. So that's how I didn't die. It's true. And every day that I think about it, it makes me laugh and also gets me kind of upset because, you know, a lot of it's painful as a journey, but just to figure out that you can get through that is pretty amazing. And I just like to try to help people understand that there can be other pathways out of a lot of physical problems. I talk about cancer a lot on this show. I talk about Green Crush as a means of getting information to people about how effective it is as a healing agent. And I know there's a lot of backlash daily in the press, and not just in a denial sense, but in a setting of the agenda. And that has to be coming from somewhere. But a lot of the people that are listening to this might be thinking, well, what are you talking about? Why would it be? Okay, here's one example. Why would it be that when you're transitioning from cannabis being the government's basic position is, okay, it's been illegal a long time, we're going to make it legal, and if you don't like the way we're doing it, too bad for you. That's the way it's going in Canada. But I understand we also have listeners in America. So you will also be thrilled to know about our first guest. Or, sorry, our second guest. Our first guest to be our second guest. Oh, I covered. Okay. It's our first guest to ever be our second guest. Maybe we should have two guests per show, and the first guest is the first guest. Okay. So in the second half, we're going to have Sterling Crockett. Sterling Crockett. Google him up if you're waiting right now. He is the CEO of Agromed, and he's out of Pennsylvania, and he's a bit of a scientist. And his holdings and interests in the cannabis business are quite astounding and very much family-driven. Family-driven crisis has now taken him to, and what more perfect a journey could there be than not only being able to defeat a certain, so to speak, illness, but to translate it into an economy that we here in Ontario might call a criminal for putting it together that way. But it'll be great to speak to Sterling Crockett, who doesn't seem to have that problem where he lives in Pennsylvania, USA. So he'll be along in the second half. But right now, before we get to the first guest, a drink of water, please. Oh, boy. It's starting to get cold in Toronto. Very cold out there. Okay, I'm taking a look behind me at this. We had to move the sticker. Didn't look right in the earlier episodes. Nice to know it's back on. All right, we are going to, I want to set the stage a little bit for Mr. Flynn, Mr. Paul Flynn. He is our man on the scene in England. He is a parliamentarian in the Labour Party. We'll get him to tell us about exactly what that means and what he does and what kind of influence he has once we bring him on. He is an extremely, what we would call an elder. I would call him an elder. He's a very wise man. And if you've listened to more than one or two of these episodes of Green Crush, you will have heard, as you did in the intro here, Paul saying to break the law. And we're going to hear why that is from Paul. So let's I'm excited about this because this guy's been in every show. Kim pointed out, she said he's been in almost every single show, Paul. Yeah, well, not like he's going to be today, so this is very exciting. Here we go. We're going to call Paul. Here we go. Ringy dingy. Come on, Paul.
Hello.
Paul.
How are you?
I am fine. You're asking me. I was going to ask you, how are you, sir? What a day you've had.
It's been a great day. It's marvellous to see the good citizens of Britain challenging an oppressive law.
Now, can you before we get to that oppressive law, let's I want to introduce you to the reason we started following you, sir, quite a while ago is because you've already been standing in Parliament telling them like it is and like it should be known. And we had great admiration and respect for you. And we started to use audio clips of you in the show because, you're saying what we're saying here. This seems to be basic logic that you're shining a light on. So how did you find out that you know, you needed to be a politician in the Labor Party. Like, let's tell everybody in the world who is listening, because we have a lot of people around the world. Let's introduce you properly. You are a sitting member of the Labor Party in Britain. Tell us a little bit about what that means and what your responsibilities are, and then we'll get to what your position on cannabis is.
I've been around for a long time. I'm the oldest front bencher since Gladstone in Britain. I'm 82. I've just been re-elected for another 5 years, which shows a great deal of optimism from the constituents. But I've never lied to my constituents, and I've always followed the paths of what I regard to be scientific logic. And I'm afraid I've written a book about MPs, which is both the best book on the subject and the only book on the subject, called How to Be an MP, which nearly all new MPs read. And I've got very powerful views, I believe, on how politics fails and how democratic politics fails. I'm afraid we tend to be in the middle of a crisis. Babies cry, dogs bark, politicians legislate. And we just passed a piece of legislation here a year ago on psychoactive drugs that did positive harm. It actually increased the number of people who use those drugs and who die as a result of them. So I think we have to follow lines that are scientific. But I'm afraid most political decisions are prejudice rich and information light.
What was the policy they had where they died? What was that policy? What do you mean by that?
Well, this was on psychoactive drugs, and you know, these are terrible things, and anyone would be very foolish to take them because they're drugs that have never been ingested by human beings before. So we don't know what the consequences could be on them.
All right.
The government were flapping around and decided that there is a legal market that existed last year. They closed that down. That's simple to do, police matter. But they should have studied what happened in the two countries, which was Poland and Ireland, that produced similar laws. And the result was, in each case, the number of using drugs increased and the number of deaths increased. And we've had exactly the same here. But 47 years ago in Britain, we passed a law to bring in the most stringent punishments for the use of certain drugs. At the time, there were fewer than 1,000 users of cocaine and heroin in Britain. Virtually no users of cannabis except medicinal cannabis. And since then, we don't have 1,000 now. We have a grand total of 380,000. And if you contrast that with Holland, after 50 years of intelligent, pragmatic drug laws, have a serious prison problem in that they don't have enough prisoners to fill their jails. And they're using some of them for role play. I mean, what do you do with a redundant prison? And we in this country, in Britain, have got a record prison population with terrible abuse going on in them. And we're still packing the prison out with people who've committed no greater offence than seeking relief from their pain. And that was what it was all about today. Yeah. And I believe it comes to a point where it's the duty of the good citizen to challenge a law that oppresses the sick and the weak. And that's what this law does. And those people suffering, as many of them, a couple of hundred turned up today, who are suffering from multiple sclerosis, can find only the only relief they can find is from using cannabis, and the government deny them that and say you could be thrown into the prison for 5 years. But what was proved today is that the law is an ass. Nobody implemented that law in public. The police were warned they were going to be there and they were breaking the law, and there were no arrests, and the police were happy to see it go. Well, if the law is unenforceable, it ought to be swept away.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the thing that spawned the show. I mean, this is why we talk to people like you and try to get this word out, that whatever the law is, it can't be sacrosanct just as the law itself, not if it's so demonstrably harmful. So
Yeah.
that's how we came across you, sir. Watching some of your things in YouTube. Were you? When was that? When you counseled that people should come to the steps of Parliament and
It,
partake in
it,
some way?
it was an act of desperation, really, because I've had bills 20 years ago, 25 years ago on this, and the government has not changed one iota in their policies. They're still pulling out the same old nonsense that prohibition works and you've got to crack down on drug users. When the evidence from your country, from 29 states in America, from Portugal and other countries in Europe, is that prohibition doesn't work, but sensible, rational policies reduce drug harm and drug use. And there is no evidence to the contrary. And what we're up against is the cowardice of politicians who refuse to lead. It's what their job is. Our job is not to follow public opinion, particularly the lowest denomination of public opinion that's expressed in some of the popular newspapers. We've got to say, look, this doesn't work. We've been doing it for 46 years. It's made the situation far worse. And we've got to take the drug distribution, manufacture out of the hands of gangsters, of scammers, of crooks, and replace it with a market that can be controlled and which can be responsible. And in that way, we will reduce all drug harm.
So where are you on that today? I mean, that was that speech back a little while ago when we first came across you back in June of this year, and then you just had a speech today, right?
Yes, I mean, I continue to. Nobody opposed it today, which means that it goes through its first reading, and we'll go through the parliamentary system now. But it means, I believe, the only way of getting the public to change. And we know that the polls that are conducted, there was one after the last time when I incited people to come up here and break the law. And there was 82% supported my point of view. And there have been polls of MPs, but MPs tend to say one thing in private, but put on a bit of a show for their.
I'm sure they do.
I'm afraid it does happen in this in this wicked world.
Oh, I'm sure it does.
Politics is above that. We've got the power to change this. I mean, when you see the people who are suffering the torment of multiple sclerosis, somebody gave a very impassioned plea today of what it meant to him. It gave him dignity in his life that he could use cannabis. It meant sure he could lead a normal life. He wasn't tormented by the pain of multiple sclerosis or the effects of the spasm.
Yeah, and I know. Everybody I know that has that uses cannabis says they can't get enough of it. Like it's the best thing going.
Yeah. I think we've got to, take. I don't want anyone to smoke this stuff or to mix it with tobacco, but of course, under prohibition, that's the easiest way to do it. But I want to encourage people to, as happened today, people were using it in cakes, in drinks, in vaping it, using it as an ointment. But you then avoid the dangers that there are in smoking anything, in smoking. If you smoke banana peel, there's a danger. But smoking itself is a dangerous occupation, and the drug itself, I mean, is very addictive. Yeah. So I certainly don't want to get people into that. But with a legal market, which would be run by doctors and responsible people, we can get people off the most dangerous forms of the drug and get them to use it for its benefit, which has been used by all civilizations for 5,000 years, for goodness sake.
Yeah, I wanted to know, as a a member of Parliament and representative of your area, and you have to deal with whatever's going on in government, and bring that to your neighborhood, basically.
Well,
there's a question I have is, in the food pyramid, if the government is so kind to offer us a structure of what we should be eating, we should be eating so many meats and so many grains and so many greens. The reason that they say things like kale and and beet greens and lettuce and endive and Brussels sprouts and those things are healthy and you should eat them is because they've been analyzed to a point where we realize, yeah, that's a good idea to eat that stuff. So where is the testing? I mean, if we got to the testing on showing just exactly how healthful this thing is, even in the male plant form, even in its own, without even the THC aspect, and to be able to just take it at any time without having like laws against being able to do that and using it as a food source.
Indeed. I think our laws that we have and the advice we give on food has been improved enormously in this country. But the situation is that that juries have got together when they've been faced with defendants who are accused of using cannabis and can prove to the jury they're in wheelchairs, they're elderly, they cry. And what a jury said to the judge, look, we're not going to convict this man. We disagree with this law. Can we let him off? And the judge said, no, it's not my job as a judge or your job as a jury to decide what the law is. It's Parliament's job. And Parliament runs away and people hide their heads under a pillow to avoid taking a decision that they might see as embarrassing. But it's not true. I mean, I've been giving this message out for more than 30 years now. I was first elected in a constituency where there was a Conservative MP, and I stood as a Labour MP, and I've been re-elected for 8 times. So there's no sign that people respect you if you stick by your guns, if you tell them how it is, never lie to them, and follow out what you believe.
Yeah. When I first started to hear about you, sir, this would have been back in the early aughts, and because I was paying attention to what was going on in the war with the Gulf War with George Bush and Iraq, and because of 9/11, we're going into Iraq and all of that nonsense. And there's a lot of you on YouTube talking about that and saying things that your colleagues seem to find quite offensive, but in retrospect are pretty much exactly how things unfolded.
I mean, it's an immense tragedy. The Iraq War, as far as Britain was concerned, we went in because of the vanity of one man. Even worse was when we went into Helmand province. I mean, it was probably right to go into Afghanistan, but not to go into Helmand. And again, there was an idea that we could go into Helmand and close down the drug trade, would you believe, and in the hope that not a shot would be fired. And we lost 450 British soldiers there. And I got thrown out of the Commons for saying that, telling young men and women that if they went to Helmand, they could stop bombs exploding, terrorism on the streets of Britain. It was an utter lie, in that there was no danger of the Taliban using acts of terrorism in Britain. Other groups might have done it. And the result of that is that we threw those lives away. And I believe we had a debate about the 100 years anniversary of Passchendaele. My father was at Passchendaele, and he went there because he was told that he could stop the wicked Huns from bayoneting Belgian babies. And he came back from that war. He went there hating Germans. He came back loving Germans because they saved his life. They picked him up when he was bleeding to death in no man's land and gave him good treatment. But the idea that we can, 100 years after Passchendaele, we're still talking the same nonsense and still throwing away lives in the belief that it's okay for politicians to lie and soldiers to die.
See, you don't seem like you're not a regular politician, because when you say things exactly like that, all I can think of is most of us don't want to do these things. And yet we are shepherded into those decisions by these policy makers who are the minority, really. And we seem to get nailed every single turn.
My belief is that you stick to those decisions. I've been called controversial. I found out this means that everyone intelligent agrees with every word I say about 25 years after I say it. So I have to stick here and I have to keep going in order to be proved right in the end. But I'm not ashamed of anything I've ever said or written in politics. And I've got a little niche where my books are well read and people do take some notice. I've got some idea that there will dawn this glorious day when the world comes to its senses. But I'm deeply depressed by the exchange of the president in the United States for what appears to be a petulant child without a brain.
Yeah.
Denying every intelligent policy that's introduced by the greatest politician of my life, Obama.
Oh, did you meet him?
I did meet him, yes, very briefly. My wife met him. My wife was. After 10 minutes acquaintance with him, I introduced him to my wife, and he looked at her, and he looked at me, and he looked at her, and then looked at me, and he said, "You're a very lucky man." Something my wife will never forget. He might well have said it to 100 people, but she will never forget that.
Yeah, I guess she took that well. That's pretty cool. Yeah. So when you, if I may ask, as a person recommending the use of this substance, how do you answer the very often made criticism that, and rightly so, it should be discussed? What do you say when people ask you or they protest and say, if we do this, if we legalize it in this way, it's going to be bad for the kids, bad for the children?
I mean, it's a powerful drug, and we shouldn't underestimate the dangers of any drug. But the head of a scientist who is ahead of the advisory body on drugs in England said that you would have to stop 5,000 people using cannabis to stop one case of psychosis. But there's certainly a link between mental illness and heavy cannabis use, but it's a very slight one. And with a legal market, you've got a better chance of keeping drugs out of the hands of people who are mentally fragile or who are young. I mean, our laws state in this country that you could give cannabis to sell cannabis to a mentally disturbed 12-year-old, and it's the same offense as selling it to a well-balanced adult. So we must respect that. But and if I mentioned the three drugs that I'm campaigning against at the moment, the three dangers, are opioid use, a drug called valproate, which is causing birth defects among women, and the overuse of neuroleptic drugs in residential homes for the elderly, where it's used to keep them quiet and to cut the costs of running the home. But that's drug misuse on a vast scale. And the opioids in America have got to a stage where more people are dying from opioids than die from guns and traffic accidents. And it's coming over here with a huge increase in the prescription of opioids for things like depression and mild pain. And this is leading to people into lifelong dependency and to early deaths. But these are the serious drugs. Cannabis has been around for so long. We know about any major side effects they'd have. We made too much fuss about it, and we've left people with the choice of using it mixed with tobacco, instead of encouraging them to use it in safer ways.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it shouldn't. I don't tell people what they should do, but I don't really recommend smoking it. No, there's so many better ways to take it in. Hey, just going back a little bit on your political history, as we go through your Wikipedia page to catch up on who is this multi-decade performer in the parliament, and we look through everything. What do you think about when? Is there any kind of political capital at all when you seem to say these outrageous things, such as what was going on in the Gulf War back in '03? And your opposition was, shouting you down to be completely out of line and ridiculous. And of course, in retrospect, you've nailed it. So when you keep doing that, and it seems like you have done that a lot, and I'm going to say that it's that kind of political acumen that I've seen in you that I agree with, particularly on this issue of cannabis. So I just wonder, like, how astute do you think I think you are because of your history of being on so many of these things? Do you ever get any kind of people behind you sort of saying, okay, all right, I agree. You got us like on these 6 major points. I'll back you up on this one.
Yeah. I mean, it was 25 years ago, I had a bill in the House of Commons to ban blows to the head in boxing. And it was regarded as crazy, but you could organize boxing to stop the head being the target.
Right.
Now I know that in football and in so many other sports, in rugby, I mean, horrendous damage is done by using the head as a target. A concussion has the effect of bringing on early Alzheimer's. Now, scientists proved that 25 years ago, but people are so set in their ways. I mean, I boxed as a child and, like the sport very much, but I get to the stage now where I just sort of try to guess how many million brain cells are being destroyed, permanently destroyed by blows to the head. And we can organize a sport where there are fewer activities where their head is involved as a weapon or as a target. And still the sports that would test the athleticism of those taking part. Now, as
so
I say,
when you were boxing, are you telling me when you were boxing, you weren't punching your opponent in the head ever?
I was. Oh God, yes. No. I did all the. I was before I was enlightened. This was a long time ago. It's when the evidence come up and you see the postmortems conducted on boxers, and something like 3/4 of them show brain damage that wasn't obvious. And then so many, we used to call it, we used to make a joke of it. There was always someone who was punch drunk, who was ambling around the gym.
Right.
Quite right. And we didn't realize in our cruel way that this was brain damage. This was early Alzheimer's. This was someone's brain. It turned to mush by the repeated blows. And it's got a cumulative effect, and the brain cells don't regenerate.
But speaking of that, though, you know about the medical advances of CTE, that brain-wasting disease that you're talking about. And there's a lot of good research about cannabis with that as well.
Indeed. I wish, but I think one of the effects of this bill, if it becomes law, it would be to free up the research. At the moment, there's huge bureaucratic hurdles to doing research into cannabis. It's a hugely complex object. There are 92 cannabinoids in there. There are lots of other substances there. And we really don't know which cannabinoids work, what effect they have. So I'm all for freeing up the research that we have so we can use this natural object for the benefit of humankind.
So basically we're down to try to get it down to a bumper sticker on a car. You'd have to say that, how would you do that? I mean, would you say, we need to educate people or because every time I hear the word education, particularly when it's coming out from the government surrounding a cannabis policy, I mean, we know it's going to be, that's not where we need to go.
I mean, things are going so well now in the last 5 or 10 years. I mean, your country, Trudeau, is very good news, and so are the states in America. And we're seeing the other states, in South America, the countries that have been ravaged by the drugs trade. The drugs are enjoyed in Chicago, but the people who are being shot are in Mexico and people suffering from the drug wars there. But I believe the advances within Europe, I quoted Portugal and Holland, but other countries now are saying, look, for goodness sake, these policies are not working. They're doing harm. And I believe that there's never been a time for more optimism than there is now.
What do you foresee in a world where, I should say, not trying to do the movie trailer guy, but in a world where we actually do, say we, meaning Britain, South Africa is in now, a lot of places in Europe. If we do actually decriminalize and stop putting people in jail. I know people are legalizing it, but that's not the same thing as decriminalizing it. I mean, where do you think we are going to be if we do actually go down that road after, say, a decade? Are we going to all come out like Portugal? I mean, is this all going to be like a global Portugal experiment? What do you think about that kind of stuff?
Well, Portugal, within a year of after 2001, after they depenalized their drugs, they cut their deaths by half, and it's continued on that. They've obviously cut their the amount spent in the criminal justice system and in prisons, and it's gone on. And the policy has sold itself to the population, and people find it a popular cause now. But I'm encouraged by America, who are not the most advanced on drugs. I mean, they gave us prohibition in the 20s and 30s, an utter disaster, where the drugs that were being sold were by the most irresponsible people, and they were the worst, most dangerous form of drugs, of alcohol, because it was distilled spirit that was poisoning people. So we must learn these lessons, and I believe that. There was a time I went to Russia about 15 years ago where they didn't have drugs problems to the extent they had alcohol problems, and they decided that as we had these drug problems, we were the people to show them how to cure it. And unfortunately, too many of the prohibitionists went there and sent them down the wrong path. But I believe there is a movement throughout Europe now, which is being given a wonderful boost by Trudeau in order to have policies that reduce harm and don't multiply it.
All right. Well, listen, as a British parliamentarian, let me ask you this. We have heard rumblings that the UK is preparing for war with North Korea. Do you have any input on that? Have you heard anything to that effect?
It'd be an act of unspeakable stupidity if that's the case.
Oh, but you can't rule it out just based on that, based on history.
No, we've done some very stupid things in history, but I believe that our link with Trump is a damaging one. We ought to treat him as a man of protozoan intelligence who behaves like a petulant child in every situation. He's constantly praising himself in terms that only an immature child would. He treats every crisis as an opportunity to praise himself. And didn't we do well? Didn't we send in good rescue equipment? It's secondary that people died or are living in misery. But here we have a man who's squared up to the irrational leader of North Korea. We've had a series of these. And if we're going to have a nuclear war, it'll come from almost certainly by accident, by a technical fault, or just by a mistake. And the nearer we get to having these light trigger confrontations and of threatening nuclear war, the danger is that something will go badly wrong. There'll be a wrong signal sent out. There'll be somebody will see a missile being launched that's not going anywhere in a dangerous way, or that's not armed, and fire back. But we're in the most dangerous situation that we've been in, certainly since the Cuba crisis. when the two halves of the world squared up against each other.
Yeah,
But
and while we're hanging in the balance of we're hanging in the balance of trying to understand if there's going to be a war there or not, and if so, why are they telling us that, at the other end of the suit they say that, this cannabis stuff is harmful. We don't want it to harm people. Meanwhile, they're engaging in saber rattling with an alleged madman with nuclear weapons. For what reason?
yeah. No, I mean, every crisis that Trump has addressed, he's managed to dangerously inflame. These are frozen crises that have been around for a long time, but are not active. He's even inflamed a fossilized crisis in the American Civil War, for goodness sake. He's got people divided between the two sides there. I mean, the man is an utter menace. And I mean, I'm hoping that the wise heads in America will do what they did with Nixon towards the end of his presidency, where they disabled his nuclear trigger. He was starting to drink too much, and he was making threats about, I can go into the next room and kill 1 million people. And this alarmed the people around him. But I'm hoping that the bag that's being carried around for Trump's nuclear trigger is disabled. And if he does start to play with it, it doesn't work, because I think it'd be justified by the few cool heads that are in his government. They're not all as mad as he is.
Well, it takes a certain breed to be a president, apparently, going by history anyway.
Yeah. And there have been some pretty strange ones, but I think we've, the founding fathers and mothers of America did put in some pretty good safeguards in order to guard them for a president that goes out of his mind. And I think we've... in Trump, those safeguards should come into play. But when he was referred to as an effing moron by his Secretary of State, that was an encouraging sign that he had a proper judgment of the intellectual abilities of the president.
Oh, Tillerson, the remark. Yeah. That's what he said. So where would it be? Where would we be in your mind? Where would we be if we got to a place where it is okay to have this stuff? And, where would it be coming from? How do you envision a transition from what this because what I look at it as how we arrest you now versus how we arrest you later regarding any of these changing legislations.
I think it's going well. I've never been so optimistic. We were in this spiral, this downward spiral of increasing prohibition I mean, I've been in the House of Commons to show the bizarre nature of the place. So, 25 years ago, where we always had a Friday debate, and I can recall one where I raised a point of order because the spokesman for the government and the spokesman for the opposition both had to leave the chamber at one point because they needed a fix. They were both addicted to tobacco. And one of them has died since of lung cancer. But they were there preaching away and saying to young people, you mustn't use cannabis, whereas the pair of them, within a few hours after the debate, were in one of the 16 bars in the House of Commons, drinking alcohol with a glass of whiskey in their hands and a couple of paracetamol in their top pockets for the headache they were going to get next day, quite oblivious to the fact that their drugs of choice were far, far more dangerous than the drugs that they were stopping young people from using.
Yeah, that's the irony. They're squatting outside in the alleyway in the garbage bins while people are boozing it up inside, no problem.
Yeah, we did have one nice moment when there was a woman politician who was Home Secretary, Ann Widdecombe, and she decided she was going to have a crackdown on drug use and multiply the fines and multiply the prison sentences because these were terrible drugs that would put people on the slippery slope.
How did that go?
About a dozen of her own party front bench, the Conservative front bench, rebelled against this and said, we used cannabis when we were young, and we haven't ended up with dead in a gutter with a needle sticking out of us. But they had ended up on the Conservative front bench, which is a different sort of degradation, but didn't kill you. But it was I mean, there are indications that people of good sense and intelligence, appreciate the utter, dark, wasteful futility of our drug laws.
Yeah, what is with what do you understand about the general? I've read this so many places where the war effort, let's call it that, whether you agree with it or not, the war effort of going into Afghanistan, and where at once upon a time they seemed to have no opium trade, but it seems like the allied forces of America, Canada, and Britain, and some of the others, I guess, probably whoever else comes up. New Zealand gets in there, who knows? One of those guys, and comes in and shepherds, basically. They shepherd this crop of opium.
Well, we got. I mean, the reading the history of the relationship between Britain and China, the Opium Wars, where we wickedly used opium in order to gain power there. I mean, it's a terrible chapter in our history. But I believe that we've got into a situation. I wrote to Tony Blair in March 2003 and said, if we go into Iraq, without trying to solve the problems between Palestine and Israel, we would seem to be acting in a one-sided way against the Muslim population, which will inflame antagonism from the mosque in my constituency to the far corners of the world. And we did that. I mean, the result of going into Iraq in order to shore up the Bush's war there did lead to terrorist attacks here. And that deepening antagonism. And it's very difficult to shift Muslim opinion from a belief that the Christian Western world is out to get them and to treat them badly. But we contributed to that by the Iraq War. And I mean, they've had a period of virtually continuous chaos ever since 2003, with a great deal of bloodshed. And the whole place is... well, almost the whole place is living in a terrible state now. But we can't look at these things and say, well, Bush and Blair, what did they achieve? I mean, Canada came out quite early out of the war after a very honorable period there in which they lost a large number of lives there, of Canadian lives. But Canada did take a decision to pull out when it was clearly achieving nothing. And we're in a position now where we stayed on, and the areas where most British people died is now run by who? The Taliban. And what's happened to the drugs trade? It's exactly the same. 95% of the heroin in the because that was the Blair's excuse for going in. So there's a terrible thing. 95% of the heroin consumed in Britain comes from Afghanistan. I mean, it still does.
Well, they make sure it does, though. They make sure it does. Don't you think? Or
yes, I mean, that's the way. I mean,
I should have phrased that in the form of a question. I'm sorry.
I belong to an organization that tried to get the poppies from. There was a group called the Sandleys Council, which was designed to use the poppies from Afghanistan for morphine. It happened in Turkey, where they changed it from heroin that was being produced there into morphine, very similar chemical products. But there was a shortage of morphine in the world. In poor countries, you can't get it. And we all might be grateful for having what is the virtually identical substance to heroin in our final agonies of life, to get a relief from pain there. So it is another medicine. and we turned it into a drug of abuse.
Before we get to the final agonies of life, what would you think would happen if cannabis was more freely accessible and more educationally promoted as to what it exactly does? Where do you think that would leave us with the opioid crisis?
Well, we know what happened in Britain when we reduced it from a classification B to a classification C, which is a milder form of punishment. The use, people threw up their hands and said the use is going to increase. It didn't. It actually decreased.
Yeah.
One of the effects we have with criminalizing cannabis is we send out a message to young people saying this stuff is wicked. It's dangerous. Your parents won't like you to use it, and there's nothing, and of course all young people know that they're immortal, they're never going to die, and you give them an irresistible recipe to take it over. But if you go to Holland, I mean, you can go out with your granny on a birthday party and have a cannabis cake.
As you should.
In that.
As
so
you should.
we're actually encouraging the use of it by giving it the glamour of being illegal, and I believe it would take its place among all the other drugs that we have. People don't drink whiskey in the same way as they drink beer, and I believe that one day we could well have heroin beer available. We will have cannabis. We have cannabis foods now, and people take it at the weekend when they were relaxing, like they're having a glass of wine now, and treat it as an adult decision to take it. And if we put out all the drugs in order of toxicity, of likely to cause addictions or poisons, we get a very different picture to the one we have, which classifies certain drugs as legal and acceptable, and other drugs as dangerous and unacceptable.
So in that those drugs right now, let's say, are illegal in the larger sense of the word in Great Britain, where does all of the cannabis in Great Britain come from?
On the medical side, most people are growing their own. I mean, I advise people to go along to Holland and get some seeds from the market in Amsterdam. And many of them are doing that now. But others, I know of a former policewoman who was forced to go around to become a customer of the petty criminals that she once arrested. And the other problem is that there are lots of scammers about. There are people who cheat, who provide cannabis of poor quality, or even it's not even cannabis. So we've got an illegal market, but most people are advised, if they can't find a regular, safe supply, to grow their own, and most people do quite successfully.
May I ask the big question?
Yeah.
Do you grow your own, sir?
No, I've never used an illegal drug in my boring life.
You've never actually also partaken of the herb? You knew I had to get to this. I mean.
No, I've had arthritis since I was a child, and I've kept safe by not taking the drugs and staying away from men with knives all my life. So, any surgery. Well, I've also believed that there's a purpose in pain, and if Michelangelo had been on painkillers and Mozart had been on Ritalin, we would never have heard of them. They'd have gone through their life with beatific smiles on their faces from cradle to grave, and they would never had the impulse, the angst to force them into creative work.
So you're advocating that we should just leave them to their madness, because without it we wouldn't have so many great artistic works littering through history.
No, what I'm saying is pain has a purpose, and I mean it's the same with grief. We all suffer terrible tragedies in life,
sure,
but we can't throw a blanket of drugs over it to hide it. It'll come out in another different way. And in primitive societies, they bang their heads against the wall, they scream and shout when they're in deep grief.
Oh.
And so should we.
In primitive societies? That sounded familiar.
Yeah, we've got, but it's, we've become too civilized. We become embarrassed about grief in life. We're too embarrassed about pain. We have to suffer a certain amount because it's the impetus, I believe, to creative work.
No, I absolutely agree, sir. And
Okay.
but I would like to thank you for being such a strong advocate of this particular plant. I want to make sure I understand the link between you don't use it. So this is interesting to me. You don't use it at all, but you are aware enough of its incredible medical applications, and maybe not even all of them. Maybe you just know of a lot of them.
Yes, no, I mean, I'm generally opposed to drugs. I say I've had arthritis all my life. I go around in a wheelchair now. I have difficulty walking, but I've never used any drug for arthritis since 1974, when I was offered drugs that would have certainly killed me by now, because I mean, I was trained as a chemist. Very well aware of, I mean, there were drugs like Araldin and Oprin that were offered to me. I don't think they exist anymore because they found to have very nasty side effects, including death, for God's sake.
Well, what do you know
So,
about CBDs? Does that not help you? Can you take those in?
it's not worth it. I'm not courageous anyway, but I'm used to living with pain. And
Oh,
I find I work better if I'm in pain
oh my
than if I'm not
goodness.
comfortable. Now, this might be masochistic,
It
but
sounds
yeah,
kind of
I'm,
like it is.
I'm still alive. I mean, I'm the only member of my family that's still alive. I was a member of a family of sportsmen and
Oh,
one sportswoman, and I was the pathetic cripple. I'm now the pathetic geriatric cripple. I am still alive.
oh, I, I never, you know what? I never anticipated that the biggest laugh I got on this show would be from a politician in England. That was hilarious.
Really, I mean, I'm speaking a foreign language to you. I'm Welsh, you know.
Right, right. But
Yeah,
you're speaking
still,
English and you're in the British Parliament. Now, what was
indeed,
going
yeah.
on today? There was hardly anybody sitting there. Why is that?
Oh, it varies. It's a very strange place, but you know, my bill should have come up at 12:30 today, and there were three statements. The government are in a state of a deep nervous collapse, and you know, they've got a leader that's interim, that had a complete nightmare at conference, and they don't want her, and nobody thinks she's going to last very long, but they're frightened to get rid of her because they would turn the party into civil war.
Oh.
So they're thrashing around trying to find popular policies that might distract them from the hell of division in their own party. It's an extraordinary situation in politics. I mean, I don't know if it was shown in Canada, the terrible speech that Theresa May at conference. I mean, assailed by
Yeah.
signs on the wall behind her and her cough, and I mean, the fact that someone gave her a notice to be sacked in the middle of the speech. I mean, what an utter screaming nightmare for the leader of a party.
But for Theresa May, it's pretty much she's going to need to be replaced, probably the way things look. And then who it doesn't seem to matter who is going to replace her. They're all the same.
Well, they've got one half of the party wanting brainless Boris, you know, who is an extraordinary character, a man who's completely uncontrollable. An incontinence of words come flowing out of him, and jokes and inappropriate comments about everything. Or they could have a boring economic person that some of the party trust. But whatever happens, they're going to have a hell of a division and an internal war in the party. But I mean, it seems extraordinary that Theresa May called an election. She had an absolute majority.
Yeah.
And to lose it. I
Poor
mean, there
strategist, maybe.
are we were 25 points behind in the poll. I was preparing for my retirement because I thought we had absolutely no chance of women winning the election, and I doubled my majority.
And where
And
does that leave
it's
you
all
now? So I meant to. I kind of wanted to hear where you think you're at with the next election. Are you, because of the way things are, and she needs to step down, and how is that going to change things? Is that going to be in your favor?
well, we got the hell of Brexit ahead of us, which seems crazy. I'm all for tearing down walls, not building new walls, which we are with Europe. And I mean, I believe there'll be a jobs hell in if we do come out of Europe because we don't have any guaranteed markets to replace them. But
Right.
it's this little England view that is very much against Johnny Foreigner, and they don't like anyone who's not British. I don't like anyone very much that's not British. They don't like the Welsh very much, I'm afraid. But it's a very much a primitive view. It's interesting that the biggest vote against Brexit was in Cambridge, which is inhabited by pointy-headed professors who know how to think, and it was a terrible decision, I believe, Brexit, and we did take a vote on someone who they were going to name a boat, and somebody put up the name of Boaty McBoatface, and that won. And I think people were in a similar mood when they voted to get out of Europe, to escape from Johnny Foreigner, who was the cause of all our ills.
Yes, we saw the Boaty McBoatface scandal. Yeah,
Yes.
that was an unbelievable situation. Well, listen, you've been so great with your time. I just have a few more questions, if you will.
Okay.
I wanted to understand what your understanding is on other areas of the world as a person positioned in your position regarding this and getting up in the House of Commons and speaking on behalf of this common sense issue, everybody. I wanted to know where other places in the world are that you are either thinking, hey, they're doing a great job of transitioning, or hey, they did a great transition, or hey, that's a bad transition. I mean, what's your take on different areas of around the globe?
Well, I'm very fond of Canada. I had a wonderful holiday there a couple of years ago, and one of my colleagues, a very close friend, we were great pals, and he sadly lost his seat, and he went to Canada and he married a girlfriend. He was 58 and been married and divorced, and he married a girlfriend that he met when he was 18. It was all very romantic, and I went across to Newmarket, near Toronto, of course, to the wedding, and he was a great man who joined this no hope party, which is now in power, I must say. But I mean, Canada has been the voice of sense in North America, and I hope it will continue to have a civilizing effect on the people south of you there. But something we're very proud of, I think, the links with Canada. But I mean, there are all sorts of strange things happening in China with drugs. They tended to follow our line. Countries like who've been tolerant for centuries, if not thousands of years, like India and the Far East, have coped with these drugs. But we've got ourselves into this idiocy of prohibition. And the great message that we should scream from the hilltops is that prohibition makes matters worse. It increases drug use and drug deaths. And we have to treat drugs in an adult way, where adults can make their own judgments on the strengths of the drugs and the enjoyment and pleasure they give them, and that we protect the vulnerable, particularly those with mental health problems, from being abused by this. But we also protect those who use these medicines of great antiquity in order to find relief from crippling pain. We're not doing that yet in Britain.
I find it interesting that the politicians, such as yourself and so many others, of course, have to craft a way to bring people in on both sides of the aisle regarding issues on a case-by-case basis. If I had to describe it, that's what I would say. So if that's anywhere near close, tell me how it is I know what you say about Canada being, at the cutting edge and ahead of the curve on the United States, and I understand that in a lot of senses. But also, some of us are frustrated with Canada's involvement in helping to procure military supply contracts for, Saudi Arabia. While on the one hand we preach, human civil rights and no bullying, and on the other hand we are keeping up a cycle of jobs to prop up you supplying a regime that oppresses human rights with these machines that we sell them. And at the same time we're doing that, we're also trying to navigate through a complicated cannabis schedule. And
Yeah.
so in your experience, I mean, you've got one issue on the one hand and another issue over here, and you need to form all of these different alliances, right? So what would be your perspective on trying to change the content of a proposed bill that's supposed to be coming into effect in July 2018, but it's before us now as a proposal. It's not actually 100% the law at this moment.
This is Trudeau's bill.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I agree with all the points you make. There are problems in our relationships with particularly Saudi Arabia now, which is carrying out a wicked war in Yemen, which is inflicting great suffering on that country. There's no real choice between the two opposing sides there. I mean, it's a dreadful situation, and we certainly should be pressurizing Saudi Arabia, where every Friday they have public executions in the streets where they chop people's heads off. But we will bow down before them as long as they'll buy our jets in the country. But I believe that Trudeau has come in like a breath of fresh air and behaved in a courageous way, more so than anyone else in the English-speaking world. And it's been a gradual process in the American states, and that's beneficial. But Trudeau is, I believe, something that we look to for inspiration. I mean, he's a highly intelligent, attractive leader, and the other groups look like brain dead dwarfs compared to him with his stature and his intelligence.
Well, I wasn't just looking for a little sunshine on my geographic coordinates here in Canada, but is there anywhere else in the world where you think, hey, they have it together, or anywhere else that you're a little bit alarmed about?
I mean, the Scandinavian nations have got it right on social affairs and on distribution of wealth, but they haven't got it right, unfortunately, on drugs. They're still pretty well in the dark ages on drugs there. But they're countries that have a form of socialism that I'd like to sign up to, because it's worked very well over a very long period. And they've got societies that distribute their wealth in a way where the bartender gets about a third of the wage of a surgeon, and there isn't the huge differences in wealth and the wealth distribution that there is in this country. And we've got Swedish millionaires come here to avoid paying taxes. So I think they're the countries that we can look to with some degree of envy and hope to emulate them.
Okay. Well, what do you see your chances at in the next election? Are you going up? Are you going to be reelected? Now you've been emboldened with this turn. I mean, I know people always ask that question, but we need to know there's a shining light like you involved.
I'll just be content if I'm still breathing in when I'm 87, which is the time of the next election. I'll be grateful for that. If my local party say, well, it's better the lunatic we know, you will just carry on, because you keep winning elections, and that's a big advantage in parties like that. That the voters keep voting me in, and they're very nice to me because I've been around forever, and I knew I know most of them by their first name terms. And if I don't know them very much, I probably knew their grandparents. So it gets to a stage where you become part of the furniture, and it would be act of treachery if to get rid of me.
Well, it sounds like you've brought us full circle to the politician. You said at the beginning of the show you didn't like the ones that lied and that you don't. And it
No,
doesn't sound like you lied to at all today. You sound like a very honorable man, and thank you so much for your time. And hopefully we can get some reaction sometime down the road, a positive
okay,
reaction
great.
from your time in Parliament.
Well, thanks for your time too. I enjoyed it very much.
Oh, thank you very much. We'll wish you the best, and I'm sure it's been a very long day. So thanks for coming on and
Yes.
telling us all about it.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay, take
Bye now.
care.
Good night.
Bye bye. Well, that was and still is MP Paul Flynn. I have to say that was pretty fun. I liked speaking with him. That made a lot of sense to me. He seemed like a guy who is just not going to take his eye off the ball right on up until, I mean, he's with a cane. He needs special assistance getting around. And he makes more sense than so many of the other people. I know people don't necessarily enjoy the socialism aspect, so I'm not trying to win or lose or campaign listeners on that aspect. But I mean, this guy really does have it right on so many things. He's got to be listened to, and especially in the fact that he doesn't even use cannabis, but as an enlightened individual, he sees that its access, let's call it medical access, shall not be medically impeded. And again, I get back to the old recreational and medical are the same thing. Back and forth. Okay, so if you're doing it enough recreationally, you won't need it medically. So that's medical. And there's a lot of science in the medical aspect of medical cannabis. Like what I went through, which I wasn't going to belabor Mr. Flynn with. He's already heard enough. They're already clicking and liking our page on Facebook. We have a social media presence. Just punch in Green Crush at Green Crush Pod at Green Crush Pod, where the green pod grows at Green Crush Pod. All right. This next gentleman is Mr. Sterling Crockett. And this is the kind of transformation that the reason, the well thought out reason, and the desire to overcome a terrible situation can not only lift you out of that terrible situation, but put you in a position where you're able to transform your life. And our next guest is definitely that guy. Sterling Crockett is going to be coming up on Skype. We are ready to rock. He's in Pennsylvania. Right? We're good to go. We might have to, if he's not there yet. Hey, he's not answering. Oops. Now he's calling me. I love this world. Okay, is that you, Sterling?
Yeah, this is me, Alan. How are you?
Fantastic. That was a very strange situation. I called you and got hung up on anyway. It's great to hear you. Thanks for coming on today. What are you up to?
No problem. things are very exciting, in my world right now. As you may know, the company that I'm managing partner for, Agromet Industries, who won one of the coveted 12 grower processor licenses in Pennsylvania. We're having our groundbreaking tomorrow.
And how long has this plan been lined up?
Well, my business partner, Bruce Goldman, and I met on September the 3rd, 2016, and agreed to start a company, which eventually became Agromet. And on September the 20th of 2017, we were notified that we were being awarded one of the 12 licenses, and we happened to have the highest score of the group of 12 that were awarded licenses.
Okay, so before we get rolling on why you were doing all of that, tell us a little bit about just, what kind of guy you were before you had a turning point that led you to this particular endeavor. Like, give us a version of your life before all of this.
Well, my life before, medical cannabis, I was a serial entrepreneur. My wife and I founded and grew a construction company from our home in Coral Springs, Florida. We grew that business to over 100, full-time equivalent jobs, and was actually one of the firms that was called into the Pentagon post 9/11 to assist with that recovery. I also spent some time one of the founders and helped to grow a defense contracting business that was involved in training and engineering support, new equipment fielding, primarily for the U.S. Army. And in 3.5 years, we grew that business to 340 employees. But it was actually my daughter Nicole's illness. She was diagnosed with kidney cancer. I think it was around 3 days after giving birth to our first grandchild. And it was through that experience that I was with her at one of her doctor's appointments, and her physician explained to us that he had patients that were using cannabis in connection with his treatment, and the results or the feedback that he was receiving was overwhelmingly positive. And so we were able to get a tincture from my daughter and really turn the tables on the, side effects of the chemotherapy. After 2 weeks, she was losing weight, didn't really have much appetite, a lot of nausea, and just as important, not very much time to spend with her daughter at a very critical time in her development. We are now 6 years that my daughter has not shown any additional tumors, and my granddaughter Samantha started first grade, about 3 weeks ago.
That's amazing. That's so fantastic. Let me ask you this: when she got the tumors in the first place, this was a big surprise to everybody?
Oh, it certainly was. I mean, it kind of came out of nowhere. And just to put it in context, it was actually trying, during the process of trying to diagnose, some of the symptoms that she was experiencing that led to her discovering that she was actually pregnant.
Wow. And 3 days later, she finds out. That is so difficult. So, I mean, okay, so you, at this point, you don't know anything about cannabis on that day, or when did when did that become involved with your daughter's illness?
Well, and Alan, I have to be honest here. I mean, up to that point, I was one of those that was, a bit of a cynic, so to speak. I had watched as, a lot of the states had passed their, medical cannabis legislation. And at that time, I was one of the people that, had a mindset that, oh, well, they're saying medical to get it approved, but it's just a precursor to adult use. I want to be clear, not that I have, any issue, with
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
with, but, and I think, at that time, what we saw, in the various markets, in some ways supported that belief. As you probably know, there are a lot of markets out there that had very credible medical programs until they went in adult use, and then everybody, kind of abandoned their medical efforts and catered to the adult use. And but this experience, made me a believer. Not only did it make me a believer, it forced me to take action because after that experience, I became a little pissed off, because I saw firsthand what it could do,
Get a
in
little
my
pissed off. Absolutely.
in my daughter's case, and immediately developed, a feeling of belief that there were people out there that were suffering unnecessarily, and that these treatments should be available. And I say that it forced me into action because my daughter's experience was actually the catalyst that caused me to become involved in the business of medical cannabis. In all my businesses that I've been involved in, I like to say I've tried to do well while doing good, and I saw an opportunity to do that in this space.
And when did that happen again? When you decided, okay, I'm going to do this?
It's roughly 3.5 years ago.
Okay.
I, was, going through my due diligence on whether or not to become involved in the business. And at that time, I felt that, as far as the cultivation and processing and all those areas were concerned, there were some serious voids that I had, and I decided to join a group as an investor, and also became involved in the licensing effort, and that was GTI Maryland, who was pursuing a license here in the state of Maryland.
That sounds like a big company.
Yeah, they're one of the larger groups out there. I think right now they have licenses in Illinois, Massachusetts, Nevada.
Okay.
They recently were awarded and will be opening soon, a dispensary in Silver Spring, Maryland.
Okay. And
Yeah.
and so tell me, when you when your partner and yourself started to, or when it was your initial phase that you realized how well it was in fact working on your daughter, did you meet with resistance at all from the doctors or any of the caretakers, or any kind of other people? I mean, it's outside of the mainstream's knowledge that this stuff can be as effective as it can be.
Well, when you have one of your loved ones suffering, and especially when you're the head of your household, and one of your worst fears is that something will be negatively impacting your family, and you'll be powerless over it. And the cannabis, in some ways gave me my power back. And no, we went through, when we were going through it, Alan, we went through it very quietly.
Yeah.
Of course, we were here in Maryland, and Maryland didn't have a program, at the time, and so forth. So we were coloring outside the lines, so to speak. But I was actually very moved by my daughter's urological oncologist, and how he explained it to us, basically saying, "Hey, listen, we're doing the best that we can do, but there's this information that I'm receiving, and I think you should be aware. I can't help you, get cannabis treatments, but I think you should have this information.
So many of them diss it out of hand, though. They'll just say, that's nothing, I'm not going to pay
Well,
attention to that.
no, and it's like I said. I mean, I guess in some ways it was the luck of the draw. Uh, my daughter was being seen by a very skilled physician, but at the same time, I believe he had compassion, and I think it was his compassion that compelled him to share that information with us. So we were very fortunate.
Yeah. Well, you have been able to take something. This is what I really like, okay? This is what I really like. There's a certain aspect or a quality that I've noticed in a lot of people, including, and I found it in myself when I wasn't really looking there, and then I started to notice it in other people too, and that is that you've taken this crummy thing that's happened to you, and talking about the cancer, and this has been a horrible thing that you had to deal with. Nobody wants cancer. Everybody doesn't want to get cancer. We get it. Nobody wants to get it. But then you wind up dealing with it. Your whole life changes, and all you want to do is just kind of get it back to normal. But when you get it back at all, it seems like a person such as yourself takes that affliction and has turned it into something that's so good and so helpful. Like, what do you think, sir, about the revolution of, like, when I got afflicted with cancer and started dealing with this stuff at the end of 2013? I kept it super quiet. It seems like 20 years ago, public knowledge-wise. But you have done, you've put this thing together as well. And I just can't believe that more people don't understand that this stuff has to trump the law. It actually works on so many levels.
No, I agree with all of that, Alan. And but as more and more people become aware, and in my daughter's case and others experience, like yourself, the benefits of this, they're more compelled to share their stories and so forth. And I think that's causing a lot of folks to take a second look. Again, it's a very, very hopeless feeling to have your daughter being impacted on the heels of something that's one of those hallmarks of life. Becoming a grandparent, and as I said before, it kind of gave us some power back, and it was we had such a positive benefit that we all sprang into action. I mean, she's a bit of an advocate and shows up and shares her experience. And when I've had a chance, I've gone to various jurisdictions while they were considering their legislation, and shared our experience as well, and have met a lot of really, really good people who are just trying to help people reclaim their quality of life.
Okay, so let's get to your company. What is it exactly that you're providing?
Okay, we are a fully integrated business, meaning that we're in the business of cultivation, processing, and manufacturing cannabis treatments, and we're also in the business of dispensing those treatments through dispensaries that we own. We are, as I shared before, a relatively young company, but after performing as the general manager of GTI Maryland and competing in the Maryland process, initially we won the license, but fell victim to, let's just call it politics, or they changed the rules after the game was played, and we came up a little short in that effort. But it was through that effort that I met my business partner, Bruce Goldman. Bruce Goldman is a Philly guy, born and raised in Philadelphia. Attended Lincoln University, the historical black college university there. Went on to Yale, where he earned an MPH, and ran hospitals for 40 years.
Wow.
One of his posts was he was the CEO of Harlem Hospital at a time when Harlem Hospital, they were talking about shutting it down, and he saved it. But his team also came up short in Maryland, and it was in the aftermath of that we met. And as I said, one day we met and decided to, pursue this license in Pennsylvania. So the opportunity, Alan, that we saw was to really, move this in a direction of more, traditional, healthcare. Pennsylvania, unlike a lot of the states, they have their program. It resides within the Department of Health, and Bruce and his colleagues knew that area, and we thought that the medical side of things, there was a lot of room for growth and improvement and so forth, and we entered the space and kind of broke with the pack a little bit in our approach. And fortunately for us, it resonated with the evaluators in Pennsylvania, and we were awarded a license.
Do you mind if I ask if it has resonated with your evaluators? In other words, your CB receptors. Have you used this substance yourself?
No, fortunately I haven't had any elements, that have required me to use the medication, but I will tell you, I wouldn't hesitate to, and we're trying to do things in a way that will, kind of take these treatments to another level. We decided out the gate that if we were going to enter into this space, that we would be involved in research, and so that was one of the things that I think kind of distinguished us. And we're truly, on the medical side of things. I mean, that's, where we want to be, and we're fully committed to that. And I think not only has that resonated with the evaluators that awarded us the license, but also people in the community where we're going to operate. Our location is in Greene County, Pennsylvania, and one of the things that's going on in Greene County, like a lot of jurisdictions throughout the United States, is the opioid epidemic. They have the second highest rate of deaths in the entire state of Pennsylvania. So they have been very welcoming and supportive of us as well.
What's been Pennsylvania's take on the opioid crisis? Like, how do you think they should be dealing with it there, and what exactly are they dealing with there in that state?
Well, I think they're bringing, like a lot of other jurisdictions, bringing dispensing, the dispensing of it, under control. And I think the biggest thing, Alan, is that they're open to alternatives. Things have just gotten so bad. I mean, this issue is negatively impacting, communities and families and so forth all over this country. And we're just at the point where people are looking for an alternative. And I think that is also, motivating a lot of folks to take a second look at cannabis and cannabis-based treatment.
It gets super frustrating. Like, whoever I speak with, I mean, I'm talking about it in my hometown. I speak about it regarding the larger areas of my province and country. We just had Paul Flynn on the phone, who's a British MP, a UK parliamentarian. Now we're dealing with you. You're working in Pennsylvania, and everybody has an opioid crisis going on. while they're making access to cannabis particularly difficult a lot of the times. It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, it's the people will bring about the change, Alan, and the
I guess so, yeah.
that more and more people are becoming aware of the problem, and there are more and more as the various states come online here with their programs. More and more people are not only recognizing but experiencing the benefits, and I think that's more than anything is going to bring about the change
Yeah.
we need to see in this area.
It's the pressure of you can't allow people who decide all of these pro-war kinds of things that are in governmental policy, and they're lining up a war here, a war there, everywhere a war, telling you what you can and can't do for your health when you're talking about a plant. Like, it's so ridiculous.
Right. Yeah. In some ways, here being in the United States, and we're all about freedom and freedom of choice and all that. But in some ways,
That's what they say anyway.
Things don't. We don't feel so free, especially when you're put in the impossible situation of having a loved one suffer and can't get treatments that others in other jurisdictions, for example, are using successfully. It doesn't make any sense.
Did you folks have some difficulties with people around you finding out that you were using this illegal plant substance to remedy the cancer?
Well, of course, Alan, at the time, I mean, we didn't advertise what we were doing until later. I mean, we did stay quiet. I mean, it was well known within the family and close friends, what we were going through and the treatment. But I will say that I didn't run up against one person that admonished me, so to speak, for what we were doing.
Yeah. I feel like we're the shameful ones. Like, we are the shame. We had to go through the shame of this and keep it quiet and don't tell anybody. And now people are like, oh, great, I'll just do this. I'll just follow this particular anti-cancer recipe. It's not even as big a deal anymore to some people.
Right. And I would also say that, I grew up in, the Commonwealth of Virginia in the southwestern part of the state, and I have very rural roots, and so I was accustomed to home-based remedies and so forth. Someone gets sick, and there would be some kind of concoction that was mixed up, and it was very effective, and so having that as a kind of a background, it was quite natural, so to speak, for me to take this type of action in the interest of my daughter's health.
Yeah, I'm so glad you did, because I feel like we're in the middle of a revolution of so many people think, and there's such aggression against the possibility that this might even bring the remedy that so many of us are saying that it does. There's people still at their own detriment are belittling the amazingness of how this stuff can be such a rejuvenative substance.
Right. Well, I'll give you an example. One of the last groups, out in the southwestern Pennsylvania that I spoke with, was a group of, law enforcement officials, addiction experts, folks from the schools and so forth. And again, it's the opioid crisis. And, one thing that was very clear, that they feel like that they are involved, in a war, and they're losing. And they are open to, the alternatives and so forth. So again, the more people that are helped, And you know, the more that the more widely that we're able to share our stories, you know, and experiences, I think hearts and minds are changing.
Well, I hope hearts and minds are changing. I sometimes think that's going on, and other times I'm not so sure. Particularly when you look at the mindset of most of the policy makers, they seem to be coming from a mindset that most of the rest of us aren't. I mean, what is this democracy they're talking about? You know.
Exactly. But you know, you again, you know, this change is going to be brought about by the people, and as you and I know, you know, you do a good job on your show of getting a wide range of people and opinions and so forth. But in the mainstream media, it seems like we're fed the same, you know, opinions from the same sources over and over. But again, you know, things have gotten to the point where, you know, the everyday person is looking, you know, for alternatives. And so I agree with you that when you look at this, you know, from the angle of the status quo, you get one picture. But you know, I'm in communities almost on a daily basis, you know, talking about this, and you know, there's a different, you know, there's a different, you know, belief and opinions and so forth, and I find that all, you know, very encouraging. So if you look in the United States, you know, the last election, I think there were about 8 states that had ballot initiatives, and of those 8 states, you know, all with the exception of Arizona, you know, passed their ballot initiative. I think the one big surprise for everyone was a state like Florida, for example, who, you know, voted for President Trump. However, their ballot initiative still passed with 72% of the vote. So it's what you see, you know, from the status quo and mainstream media, you know, on a day-to-day basis, and then what's happening on the ground, you know, so to speak, is very different.
Well, I thank you for your involvement because I have to point out to everyone this is the second time today we've had two guests on the show. We don't usually have two guests, and both of them don't actually partake or use the stuff that we're talking about, but actually are working hard to bring it to everyone, to help us understand that this stuff is a medical, some call it a miracle. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I'm so sorry, sir, that you had to go about this in the way that you did. It's pretty awful stuff, right? When you're going through that whole cancer ride, I mean, that was just...
I mean, just the...
People don't understand how painful it is. I mean, your daughter had just given birth, and so there you are with this little child, and all of a sudden the mother is quite ill with this terminal disease. I mean, that does things to your brain, right?
Oh, yeah, it does. But, you know, we are, you know, we're a strong family and you know, very supportive, you know, of one another. And, you know, we attack this, you know, together, and you know, our extended family, you know, was supportive and so forth. And you know, Alan, that made, you know, that, you know, into the world, you know, so beautiful.
Yeah.
Take her mother.
That
away.
drive of spirit is so key to go along with all of this stuff. And I'm so glad that you were able to bring it on to the show with us. Man, this is a heck of a story, and I'm so glad to meet you on the phone. Okay, so Sterling Crockett, Agromed, tell people where it is they can make themselves familiar with the products of Agromed, and we'll have you back on the show, particularly if you have a new line of something or if you have anything you want to talk about in that regard. We're happy to do that.
Well, you know, unfortunately, the way the program is run here in the States now, that, you know, your producing and manufacturing and dispensing has to remain, you know, within the borders of the state where you're licensed. And, So right now, for Agromed, that's the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and hopefully the latter part of the first quarter of next year, we'll be able to offer our first products, to the market. I can tell you that one of the things that we're working very hard on in a collaboration with a company by the name of Univec is a transdermal patch that we're developing, and we'll develop also topicals and so forth. But
Okay.
moment, stay tuned in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Okay, we will stay tuned to Agromed, and we can look at you online, right? Agromed.com.
Is actually agromedindustries.com.
Agromed Industry. Agromed, folks. AGRIMED Industries.med. Okay, thank you very much for coming on the phone, sir. Thank you. It's been so great. Hey, did you get a chance to hear Mr. Flynn before us, Sterling, or were you in the netherworld?
Unfortunately, I was in the netherworld. The other thing that's swirling around in a big milestone for our company, we're preparing for our groundbreaking for our facility in Greene County, Pennsylvania, which takes place tomorrow. So
okay, well, good luck with that. This is a live show, so thanks for everybody to listen to this, and that's a groundbreaking thing for you tomorrow. I think it's so great that we're on the cutting edge of your cutting edge company, and you'll tell us about how you're doing progress-wise later. Is that okay?
Absolutely. I'd love to come back on and, share with you and your audience on how things are going.
Well, thanks a lot, Sterling. I really appreciate it. Sterling Crockett, everybody. We will talk with you again, sir. Thanks for your time.
All right. Thank you very much.
Cool guy. Nice guy. I like that people can take the garbage of their life and turn it into something that actually powers them through the next phase of whatever they were looking for. So that's been a heck of a long show for us, and I'm okay with that. We have to get going though, and we've got some pretty cool guests coming up. We've got Ross Rebegliati coming on. He was a snowboarder and he got into trouble because the snowboarding police in the Olympics said that he was probably high, and he denied it, and they gave him his medal back after they took it away. And anyway, he's a pretty cool guy because he's a snowboarding Olympian. How can you not be cool?